I'm not going to say that he was lying, but we are the Armed Attorneys. Today, we're talking about kind of an open secret with police officer training when it comes to courtroom testimony, what we can learn from it, and why we might need to be taking some initiative and preparing should we find ourselves in a self defense scenario and how these techniques can benefit us. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And today's video is brought to you by friends over at Sonoran Desert Institute. Check them out at sdi.edu/armed-attorneys and our friends at Aura. Anyone can find anything on the internet, including your full legal name, your personal email, your home address, phone number, and even your relatives. I tried it out for myself. I Googled one of my sister's phone numbers and immediately found her home address. And that's kind of scary because she's a former prosecutor and her address is hidden by law. So this information is accessible because of data brokers who profit by selling your information to robocallers, telemarketers, spammers, and anyone else that wants to learn more about you. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, Aura.
Aura will identify data brokers that are exposing your information and automatically submit opt-out requests on your behalf. They'll even opt you out of junk mail and telemarketing lists. You can use our link, aura.com/armed attorneys, to try 2 weeks and see how many data brokers are sharing your information. It's also linked in our description, or scan the QR code. Aura also monitors your emails and passwords to see if they were involved in a data breach and exposed on the dark web, and gives you recommendations on what to do.
Aura's app also features a VPN, password manager, real-time credit and identity theft monitoring, internet parental controls, and protects your devices from malware. Aura has almost every internet safety tool you'll ever need. It's all inside the app. Let Aura do the hard work for you and keep you safe online. If you sign up right now, Aura will give you a 2-week free trial with our link.
You'll be shocked at how much of your private information Aura finds exposed over those 2 weeks. Go to aura.com/armed attorneys to start your free trial. It's also linked below in the description, or scan the QR code.
What is prompting this discussion? Well, we have David Maxwell, former Texas Ranger. He was testifying in the impeachment trial of Attorney General Ken Paxton here in the state of Texas. And anytime we get a high profile case or a case that's recorded or broadcast, we can always analyze those things, look back, and use them to illustrate important points. Now, as it relates to self-defenders or folks who might find themselves in a critical incident or on the wrong side of the government having to testify about, the worst day in their life, the day that they had to save their own life or act in self-defense, there's something that we can learn from police officers because they get this stuff a lot of times in their kind of basic peace officer training, or, they're required to get continuing education. There's oftentimes classes on courtroom testimony. There's some kind of tricks and tips in here that I think we can learn from, and some steps that we can take to prepare should we find ourselves in this scenario, so that, God forbid you ever have to go and testify in front of a jury. Maybe you perform better, or maybe you tell your story better, or maybe you come off more credible. Maybe you get the emotion out of the story in a way that makes the jury more sympathetic. But let's roll this clip first so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about.
Why is it that every time I ask you if you've taught folks to testify, you suddenly can't hear the question?
Actually, my testifying, I learned by experience.
Okay. And is that one of the things you've learned by experience, Ranger, to pause and act like you haven't heard the question?
Maybe.
Fair enough. Well, what did you learn?
I learned that it throws you off.
Does it? Does it? Okay.
It's a short clip, but there is a lot on display here. And I think this kind of, I saw this clip and it kind of made me scratch my head a little bit because I think he destroyed his credibility very quickly. And, when he testified, you saw leaders from all over the country. Even Chip Roy gave him a shout out and said, man, this guy's integrity and credibility can't be questioned. But you see this kind of game he's playing on the stand, and how I think that really does sink his credibility. But coming back to being a good testifier in trial, we always have to go back and look at kind of origins. And we look at kind of the Greek tradition of logos, ethos, and pathos. And so that's reason, credibility, and emotion. So you have to have all three of those in order to be a good testifier. Now, when police officers go and testify on the stand, they are given specific training on how to handle these things. And we'll talk about I would say, the dirtiest trick that he deploys there. But first things first, in a trial, a witness's testimony is typically broken into three parts: their direct examination, their cross examination, and their redirect examination, if there's some cleanup that needs to take place. Now, in direct examination, police officers are trained to tell a story. They're taught to make themselves the hero, make the accused or the defendant, or maybe in a case of self defense, the defender, the bad guy. They're supposed to show the jury a problem, talk about how they approach the problem, how they solve the problem. And so they tell this kind of flowing story about, why they're there and why they're the good guy. Now, they get all kinds of training on that. What can we learn from that? Well, I think it comes down to preparation. One, knowing the subject material very well. And so, should you find yourself in a defensive scenario, that means reviewing your statements or statements you gave to officers, or a lot of times, like what I will do with clients, one of the first things that I do is I'll say, hey, write me out a statement about what happened from beginning to end in as much detail as you can remember. No detail is insignificant. And should this case find itself in trial a year later, I mean, we're not recording machines. Your memory isn't going to be the same. They can go back and refresh their memory. So, preparation is key to all of that. The other one is, I think, having a command of speaking in public. Now, they say the two biggest fears people have are dying and public speaking. And so, I mean, you have to become comfortable with speaking in public. Now, I think, and I've heard this analogy that, when there's a lot of eyes on someone, that it is kind of a primal instinct. Back in tribal days or prehistoric days, if a lot of people are looking at you, that means you're up in front of your tribe getting chastised, or maybe something worse. And so maybe it's something, hardwired into us, but you need to put yourself out there, step out of your comfort zone, join a Toastmasters, something, but you got to be comfortable with speaking in front of other people. And I mean, the time to start training for that isn't after your defensive incident. The time to start training for that is now. Now, onto that second part, cross examination. Now, This is by the party opponent. So, this is the defense attorney grilling the police officer, or say you're in a self defense trial and you have to testify, or you've made the decision to testify. This is going to be the prosecutor cross examining you. Now, what can we learn from police officers? What kind of training do they receive on cross examination? Well, the big one is called avoiding the yes train. Now, what's the yes train? Well, in cross examination, the person who's asking the questions gets to offer up what are called leading questions. That's where they offer the information or the substance of the statement, and the witness either agrees with it or disagrees with it. So, what does that look like? If I'm cross examining a police officer, so you walked up to the suspect's car? Yes. You put your hand on their handle? Yep. You pulled open the door? Yep. And you didn't have a warrant, did you? And so you get them to agree, agree, agree. And it kind of lures folks into this kind of false sense of, oh, I've said yes, 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 yes. So the next question, it's going to be yes. Police officers are specifically trained to slow the person questioning them down, not to always agree, and to think thoughtfully about what is being asked and then providing the answer. So we need to do the exact same things. How can you avoid the yes train? Well, it's listen closely to the question. If you understand the question, answer the question truthfully, and but don't just yes, yes, yes to try to get it over with as fast as humanly possible, because maybe you say something that you wouldn't have said, maybe if you were paying attention. Now, another technique, and this is what the ranger does in the video that we just watched. I'm not going to say that he was lying, but it's a common technique that lawyers can detect when someone is lying because they take too long to answer a question. They're quickly answering questions, one, two, three, and then suddenly you ask them a question and they have to think for a second and then provide their answer. Well, if you have to make up things on the spot, what's a good way to obfuscate or cover up the fact that you're having to craft an answer on the fly? Well, you could pretend to not hear the question. And we see the former ranger do that in this scenario. Now, like I said, I don't know that he's lying or he's not being truthful, but that's definitely a technique that the police are taught. If they don't know the answer to something or they need to craft something on the fly, they'll say, to the best of your recollection, try to come up with whatever you can. That's a technique that they're employing. Now, I'm not saying that you should do that. Folks should always testify truthfully, and you should have prepared a lot with your attorney should you find yourself in that scenario. If you sit there and and stumble with your answers, or you're answering in a cadence and then your cadence suddenly changes, that's going to hurt your credibility with a jury. So how do we combat that? Be prepared with the material. And if you don't know the answer, say, I don't know the answer. Truthfully, if you don't know the answer, you can say that, because there you saved your credibility. Maybe there's a resource that can refresh your recollection. Civilians are not given the same leniencies as police officers. Now, if should a police officer find themselves in a critical incident, a lot of times they're given 24, 48, even longer hours before they have to provide a statement. In that meantime, they get to watch their body camera, their dash camera, surveillance videos, read their buddies' reports. They get to get everything, all their T's crossed and I's dotted before they're required to give a statement. Now, what can we learn from that? Obviously, we don't want to be talking to the police without an attorney. Obviously, we want to be waiting. But the reason that they do that is so that they can have all of the information, make sure that it's consistent with everything else before they give their statement. So, should they find themselves in trial, they can refresh their recollection, and it's going to fit in the big scheme of evidence with everything else. Now, what can we learn from that, and how does that work for trial preparation? Well, you shouldn't be talking to the police without an attorney. If you find yourself in custody, you should always invoke your right to remain silent. Say, I invoke my right to remain silent. Invoke your right to an attorney. Say, I invoke my right to an attorney. Don't say, I think an attorney would be nice. I think an attorney would be great. Maybe I should talk to an attorney. Invoke it. I invoke my right to an attorney. So that should you find yourself on the stand, that preparation can start taking place immediately. That attorney can start preparing you like you're a police officer from day one. But I hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video. And we always appreciate your questions and comments in the section down below. And until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.